Welcome to another live episode of Campaigns and Conquests, the go-to place for all things tabletop role-playing and war games. In this episode, we explore the realm of the endless game. How far can a tabletop RPG really go? Can a game truly have no end?
Hello, my name is Storm. This is Magenta, my co host. Welcome to another Campaign and Conquest. We're just starting out. This would be our third episode. And I'd like to welcome you for viewers. Tonight we're on YouTube, Twitch, and Kick, which is a alternative competitor, whatever you want to say, to Twitch streaming. So I think we'll just jump right in and start talking about it. I got the idea to discuss this issue after reading an interview of Robert Kuntz, who's a author, game designer, and one of the original D&D Blackmore crowd individuals, and he was discussing the idea of expanding RPGs and a open-ended type of game, and made me think of a couple of experiences that I had with those kinds of things, and had one discussed by my uncle of all people. And I've got a lot of uncles, and you'll hear about them from time to time. In this case, I'm talking about my uncle Peter, who was involved with the federal government, and the federal government had something similar to that, although open-ended isn't the right word. It was long-term, to say that. So looking at both the idea of a never-ending thing and the idea of something very large. So um, excuse me, we'll get it right one day. Anyway, so you ever thought of the idea, Magenta, of playing a game that had no end?
Well, kind of like life, right? Yeah, that sounds like that would be exciting. What would be a good game for something like that that would be endless?
Well, there's a couple of individuals or groups uh, that have played RPG campaigns for decades at a time, and made that way they're essentially never ending until they cease and desist, or time catches up with them and they decease. But there's a couple. I can't recall the gentleman's name who was doing it, but yeah, that's their idea of just a constant, never-ending campaign. And with D&D, like uh, Robert Kuntz talked about, he says you may not live through it all as a character, but you get it's like a video game. You go get a new character and jump
Right.
back in with it, instead of
Well, video games, you respawn the same character and start right back where you left. This would be a little bit more realistic in the sense that you would have to create a new character and kind of pick up from there with a new character that you're still playing, but you're playing as a new, um, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to just bring resurrect your old character unless you had some kind of special skill or something. I imagine, that would allow you one of your, wizards or someone has resurrection powers. But that
right.
seems a bit. It kind of takes it from role playing games into the soap opera genre more so, where the character's never really dead when you think they are. But
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It most systems, of course. Robert Kuntz is, I shouldn't say exclusively D&D, because he's got his own inventions, and he's well rounded and played other games. But from the perspective of D&D, there is the possibility of resurrection, although that's a difficult thing to achieve. And it's not supposed to be without its pitfalls. Similar to, I know you're a big fan of Buffy. The whole idea of bringing somebody back or snatching them out of heaven. It didn't go without a hitch. So there's that too.
right,
Mm-hmm.
there were definitely complications, and they didn't appear until kind of later on. So even her friends who did it thought it was a success until they learned otherwise.
Right. and that's up to a game master to make that kind of situation uh, dramatic and interesting with those kinds of consequences. But the idea of bringing a character back in is something that's become very contentious. Some people are very uh, vehement in opposing the idea of a character death as it destroys the story in their opinion, where others say, no, this is a game about risk, as is life. You're fighting terrible things in dangerous places, and the whole idea of a hero is one who risks themselves, uh, sometimes selflessly, excuse me, and at the cost of their own life in some cases. So you should have that risk in there. But as far as being able to take it back, come back once you've lost a character, there's numerous routes to take. There's simply just having a pile of characters prior to play, and inserting yourself via the DM's instructions somewhere else in the realm and starting over. A lot of people would have hirelings, what they call hirelings, henchmen, people that were not player characters, but on your side that you paid, NPCs that you paid to help you fight, and people
Right.
would take over one of those if they lost their main character. It was the easy way to do it. So, and it was, if you're an advanced Dungeons and Dragons fan, you can look in the advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and they have thought this through. They've included information on how to do it. That's why when you read about creating characters, it starts talking about lifespans. Of course, most people go, "Well, that's ridiculous. I'm only playing a game for a while. How's that ever going to come to pass?" Well, if you've been playing a game for 40 years, it's conceivable that if you start a character at the age of 18 or 20 or something like that, that in the you know they might not last long,
I
throughout.
imagine that could be influenced too by what kind of character it is, because
Right.
you get a warrior out there, that's a very physical role, and as you age, you're not going to have the same level of physicality. A
Exactly.
wizard probably would have a longer lifespan because they would have. I mean, the stereotype of the gray bearded, long beard on a wizard, long
Right.
lived and having some additional powers over longevity,
Right.
maybe implied, but and elves, of course, have a naturally their species is just long lived compared to humans. Not sure about the lifespan of a dwarf. I would assume it also would be similarly longer than a human's would be, but
Hmm.
um, thieves and warrior classes, they're going to be more likely to succumb to old age, I would think. Or would that be something that would be included in the rule set where you would have like a penalty as you got older for age? Did you have to do like an age roll or infirmity roll or something like that?
I'm sure some do. I think that uh, some probably do. I've been doing this a long time, um, but it's for a niche hobby. It's still fairly expansive. So, um, coming across every product and every way of doing things is impossible, even if you're steeped in it for as long as I have been. So I'm sure there is. I get to the point where I've been talking about this on Twitter a lot. I'm getting to the point uh, where the rules are becoming lesser of an issue for me. My One of my mentors, my biggest war game mentor, Gary Bloom, he got to a point where he says, there's too much of this kind of stuff, and I can't keep it straight in my old head. And so he started to go from having very specific rules about different genres to very open-ended general rules that could cover all sorts of different genres and stuff like that. And I'm getting to that point too. So whether a rule set would be able to do it, I would look at it like this. If you're going to stick, let's just stick with D&D as an example and have the 3d6 type of ability scores. As you age, uh, as a DM, I might start taking off a couple of strength points. Maybe once you hit 40, you lose one. and then as you hit 50, you lose another. Or maybe it starts increasing exponentially as the decades go on.
As
Just
someone who is over 50, I can tell you you lose more than one. But anyway, it's personal
right.
experience, you know. But I think it's interesting the concept of having a character that can progress to the point where they are getting to that level where you have to consider that. I mean, that would be a really successful game. You'd have to have a level of excitement that you would have to maintain with the game to give it that endless appeal so that people would want to continue playing till their character got up in years like that. So, what do you think about how to craft a game that would make it exciting and something that people would want to continue playing for that long?
Well, let's dive into that. But one remark, just for the audience at home, as far as the age thing goes, if you see me moving around like a you know a fidgety youngster, age my back, sit still in one place, it starts to So I'm always doing this. So just so people realize that, hey, I'm not over caffeinated. It's killing me. But yeah, how do you do that? Well, uh, like one of the great, in my mind, at least my opinion, one of the great uh, game designers for niche tabletop gaming, wargaming, Jim Dunnigan. He used the quote. Now, everybody, I've used this quote before, but I'm going to use the same preface. Hold your breath. Don't react until you hear it all. Uh, Plagiarize, plagiarize, plagiarize. Now, that's not in the illegal sense. It's in the idea that everybody's influenced by the people around them and the people before them. Take a good idea and use it in a manner that works for you. No one is going to be able to reinvent the wheel every day. So you can find things like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as a good starting point because they did have a lot of thought and guidelines and rules into having longevity, as I just discussed, other ways of perpetuating a game infinitum. So
Oh,
mhm, that's a good place to start. Hello, we have a visitor.
good
And
evening.
speaking of age, I've got to lean in to read it, even with glasses. Uh, Whoopi? Whoopi? I'm sorry if I'm not
Who
getting that right.
BB?
What's
If
that?
I'm saying that right, I hope I'm saying that right. It looks like Who BB to me.
Okay. All
It's
right.
cool. Cool name.
All right.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Um,
Hello.
Feel free to chime in with any questions or comments that you have, or even if you wanted to get up on the mic and talk, you're definitely welcome.
Oh, and
Oh,
so
okay.
okay. Yeah, we've been playing Star Wars with you, so yes, we recognize you now. Um,
All right. Excellent.
right, great. So anyway, yes, we were talking about ways to do it, and I think that again, you can get uh, inspiration from other game systems or ideas. There's a couple that come to mind that I don't know a whole lot about. I don't know that I've ever played, but there is Ars Magica. There's another one called Kingdom Death Monster. They're very open ended games that are meant to just kind of play out uh, without any real um, end in sight, large worlds and such. It's that, and it really starts, in my opinion, with that. And that was one of the things that Rob was talking about. Rob Scoop was talking about is you have to have a world that is expansive and deep, and it's something that I've always thought of, even in my isolated. I've been there's were years where I wasn't able to talk to very many gamers, but I always thought this. Um, I my worlds. It doesn't matter what the person is, NPC is, what the player wants to do. You don't just have. Rob put it this way: there was a lot of games where you had a town with a tavern and a place where you bought stuff, and that was it. It was very two dimensional. You went from there to go rest, resupply, dump your gains in treasure, maybe get some more flasks of oil for your torches, get more
Food,
arrows, get food, rations, right, exactly, stuff like that,
right?
and then go back in there and do it. There's video games that were kind of like Diablo was sort of like that. If you remember that old,
Lord of the Rings online is like that too. You have to go
right,
back to the town,
right,
you do your crafting, and you do your you buy your stuff that you're going to need when you go out, and you have
right,
to go to um, the vault to kind of put your stuff in
put your
storage
stuff
so you have room
right,
for more stuff.
right, and the interact.
Although
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to say, although the way they've changed the game, you can basically buy endless storage.
Yeah,
So
it's gotten
it's not
ridiculous.
really, yeah.
Mhm.
How do you carry that refrigerator on your back into
Right.
into Mordor? I don't know, but
Right, right. But it's a good example because you could there's people everywhere, and it provides kind of a ambiance to you as you're wandering through Breetown or wherever it is. But you can't
yeah,
really unless they have some function to either serve you, like the vault person, sell you something through their store by buying whatever that you can buy stuff with the fake money, or you can buy stuff with your real money.
yeah.
That's the only people you can.
So
I like
Norm,
where
just want to point out a comment here from someone who's commenting from YouTube. Will, setting is super important. I always like uh, getting into a super deeply written setting.
sure
And
that's what
I agree. That's basically what you're saying as well.
that's
That
what I'm
it's
talking
the
about.
setting, it creates the ambiance and the feeling that you're really there, even if you're not getting something necessarily from a non-player character. You're still they make you feel like a part of the world, even if you're not buying a potion from them or any of those types of things.
Well,
Although I will say, as a player myself, sometimes I get tricked into thinking that every NPC must have some hidden importance, and so you can end up spending some time grilling the the barkeep, and only to find out that it's just a barkeep. But
right,
it keeps things interesting, right?
right. Well, that's right, and that was the ultimate place where I was going to, is that there isn't anybody in any of the settings, no matter how trivial or they may seem, that you as a player cannot go to and talk to or interact with, and that no matter where you look. For example, another thing is, this is here's another one that gets people real riled up, is that real time stuff. But uh, here's the thing: if you go out to the dungeon for 6 hours, just pulling out of my and everything that was going on in the town that you left doesn't just stop. I don't like the idea. Some people they just all they have is what interaction they need as a GM to give you as a character. It, if somebody's baling hay, it may not have anything to do with what's going on in the rest of the adventure. But if there was a pile of hay in the field when you left, you should remember to tell people if they walk past that field that that pile of hay ain't there anymore, because the people working on it have spent 6 hours baling it up and moving it away. Things like that. Everything should be happening all the time, irregardless of if it's in the view of the player or not. To me, that was what real time was supposed to be, and that makes a very immersive uh, setting. But as far as that going on all the time, it's just a matter of keeping track of as much of that as you can. I have tools that I use. People that say, well, that's all too, you get a lot of that where people say, I don't like writing all that down, and keeping track of all that would be very hard. And fair enough. This is one reason why I always balk at people, no matter how old you are, when you go into this. Well, I like tradition, and I just like the face to face, and I don't like to use technology with things. Well, okay. Um, I've been using technology with tabletop gaming since 1980, when I hauled around an 11-pound Tandy 600 laptop with an LCD screen. And I just found it a way to alleviate the complaints about, record keeping and so forth. It was very easy to do. It's just automated. We were in the dawn of technology and so forth. So why not use that sort of thing? I've got a tool special built to handle the very thing I'm talking about without driving yourself nuts, having a stack of papers this big, because you have to track, you know, Jimmy the farmhand along with the evil, king or your player characters and everything like that. It's all automated and it makes it easier. It's a tool. So I recommend doing that. But that's how I keep things into a giant ever
Hello and
spinning.
welcome, Rift.
Hello.
Sorry, yeah, I just want to introduce folks here. So, Rift the Breakers join us. Feel free, as this applies to everyone here. If you want to have questions, you want to participate, make a request to get up on the mic. Everybody is welcome, and we look forward to hearing everybody's opinions. So, just chime in whenever you want. Just post a message here. We'll see it, and you know, if you want to be a guest on the mic or on camera, it's not required, but it is welcome.
Another thing that you need, uh, which probably is an obvious statement to make, but the other thing you need is you need committed people. I'm not against face to face, although for all the complaints that I personally have about people on the internet, and I've had lots of altercations with people. Well, when I say lots, I've been doing this a long time, so it's not been a regular thing. But I've got the anecdotes, I got the stories of the one time somebody was an a hole, the one time somebody wasn't, just wasn't somebody that was prepared for public discourse. So face to face can have its own problems, but I will concede that the if you're going to have a game that goes on forever, the most likely scenario where that's going to succeed is where you have close friends, both geographically and emotionally close friends, that are dedicated and as passionate about the game as you are. It's not the kind of thing that you can set up with a bunch of strangers and continue. Uh,
Well,
you know,
I want to push back on that because I think that I have made friends out of people who were players, and I feel close to them even though I don't ever see them in person. You're interacting in a way that you kind of get to know the character of a person, even though you're playing through a role playing character. You get to know how they make decisions and their sense of humor and what's important to them and what they like, and little things bleed through. You're never really completely in character, if you know what I mean. There's always a little bit of you that breaks through into whatever character you're running or
mhm.
playing as. So I feel like you can make friends that way, but I think you're right. For a game to last, everybody's got to develop a social bond online as well. As you do in person. So,
The other
um,
thing you need is a lot more people. It's because people that say, well, as a GM, you can only handle so many. Well, that all depends. Depends on, I mean, maybe you, I don't know how to put this with, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being arrogant or anything like that or putting anybody down. Maybe you have a tolerance level. Maybe you have, uh, this is just as much as I want to put into it. So 6 people is more than enough as far as keeping track of them and all that sort of thing. That's fine. But it you can do it if you want to. I've seen people run
well,
15-man games, stuff like that, and you need that if you're going to have a long-term thing, just to keep people coming in and out.
yeah, I can see that. I
Mhm.
also see though the role to my mind. So there's certain character types. It depends on the story, but like if you have a traditional D&D type of game, you're going to have a wizard, magic user of some kind. You're going to have a thief or something, a rogue maybe, whatever the names may differ, but there's a certain point where the roles become redundant, and I can see that getting kind of confusing. Like, okay, who's going to be your warrior? Um, maybe you can split the warrior into two types. Kind of the way that Lord of the Rings Online does it, which you've got one who's like a tank, a shield, someone who specializes in like taking the hits. And being a defender that way, and someone who's more they call it a champion, where they're more sword wielding and on the attack kind of fighting style. But it's kind of hard, I think, to have like a role where you've got like more than two warriors, and how would you handle something like that in a larger group?
Oh, that's well. It Griffin. He's the fellow who's made the Blackmore. documentary was talking about this idea, and that your party is, in a way, not that dissimilar from a some sort of military organization, some small team of specialists, and everybody's got a place. And having more than one isn't necessarily a bad thing. Redundancy has its advantages. You know,
Mm.
attrition being an issue. If you're playing an old school game where death isn't some taboo to be ignored, you having somebody be a backup. There's also ways where they can, like you say, somebody can take a defensive role, somebody can take an offensive role. You can have magic users that collaborate in certain ways, or maybe um, specialize in a type of magic that can be used, whereas another one has a different type of specialty that can complement one another and all that. It's a matter of having leadership and teamwork where all the parts can work together, even if they're somewhat redundant, and a system that doesn't make copycat stuff. Just because you're is every magic user the same in your rule set? Well, then that might make it more difficult. That's why I like skill based stuff instead of ability based stuff. If you play my game, you can be a magic user, but you may not be anything like the guy next to you who's also a magic user. You'll have a different set of magic spells and so on. Right, and that's the
Yeah.
other thing. What are you taking on? Are you? I mean, in my system as well, I like to have extreme lethality. So even if you are several levels above your potential enemy, okay, well, we're just fighting hobgoblins. Yeah, but how many? There may be a point where it doesn't matter how badass you are, you can't take 300 of them without a little, without somebody else with you. So, yeah.
Good points, both you and I read what Will wrote here. You never know if you need a backup warrior or if there's just that many enemies at the gate. Which, yeah, I do want to disclose. I'm kind of newer to the whole role playing game and war games and all of that kind of stuff. So my role here is to ask the stupid questions sometimes. So mission accomplished.
Well, there you go. That's all right. You got to start somewhere, and it does. It's a point because, and again, it can make a difference if you're playing something where everything is fairly cookie cutter as far as classes and stuff goes. You might start scratching your head. Okay, why do we have two guys that pick locks and do nothing but pick locks? Because that's something that usually isn't done in a collaborative manner, depending on the locks. So, the one thing that I have a question about with a lot of people who are looking to play something completely open ended is where's the incentives and rewards? As starting with uh, wargaming more than I did role playing, there was an objective, there was a hill to take, there was an enemy to destroy, there was a castle to knock down or seize. If it's just endless open play, cool, but what's going to keep me wanting to come back for more other than just overt greed for more gold so I can, you know, buy cool stuff or whatever. So that's an interesting point that I'd like to hear some of these uh, gentlemen. What would you look for to gain in a world where, or a game where there's no true victory to be achieved or end result? What do you think, Magenta? What would you be doing with it?
Well, I kind of want to quote Buffy here, if you guys don't mind, because I think she said the evil just keeps coming. You never fully get rid of it. It's always going to be there, and you're always going to have to fight it. That's paraphrasing, of course, but basically, yeah, there is no actually winning in that particular type of battle, and I think that would be applicable to other things too, especially if you're dealing with kind of a like with Star Wars, for instance, you've always got the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force, and the contest is never ending with that because there's always, for balance to exist, there's always going to be both, and they're always going to. Um, this is interesting. If it's endless without victory, I'd try to create a faction of my own.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Where you
Mm-hmm.
can basically grow and take over more kind of like a world building type of aspect to the game. Is that
Right.
what you mean, Will?
Mm-hmm. Like acts. Alex Baccaris makes Axe, and it's kind of the same thing I'm, looking at with my idea is that, uh, yeah, go to the dark side, whatever it is. But uh, my opening world in my paracosmic convergence, there is there's just the same type of idea. You start out, you and your party, exploring things, and then realize that there's a world around you as you discover it, filled with different little principalities and governments that are, there's a friction point at their borders, or there's a problem with a personality conflict between leaders where they, or cultures in some cases. And you can involve yourself deeply into those conflicts, or you can uh, advance your way into one of the governments as a leader of it or a hero of it, and become uh, somebody that shapes the political landscape, for lack of a better way to put it, around you. Or you can just keep on, you know, being that type of adventurer who's known for just experience gaining, becoming more powerful, kind of the, doesn't
Like The
want to be
Witcher.
involved. Yeah,
like
right,
you're
right.
like
Doesn't
you're
want to
just
be
a loner
involved.
that you go out there and you
Mm,
kill monsters
right.
to survive, and you go
Just
from one monster to the next,
exactly.
or you're someone who's trying to develop a kingdom of your own,
Hmm.
you're the next Genghis Khan or whatever.
Hmm. And again, that's to have that rich uh, longevity. You have to have a lot of, why are they fighting? It's not just like setting up, say, something like Tactics 2, which is an old war game where everybody's fighting. There's no real explanation as to why. Here's blue and here's red, and they just fight. And but if you have a deep cultural description, tradition, explain traditions, explain the politics to a degree deep enough so that the players can understand why there's these conflicts, and get involved in participating. Like Dune is a great example of something like that. These different factions and all their little idiosyncrasies. I suppose Game of Thrones is in its own way too, um, but when you have that kind of depth and detail as to what these little areas are, they can really
If you're going to play a
make
Game of Thrones type of role playing game, I recommend rolling up at least eight characters, because seven of them are going to die in the first episode.
right, right, right. That's it. Yeah.
That's, that's just how Game of Thrones is.
So one of the other, I do like to mix uh, role playing and wargaming up. And one of the other things I want to talk about, um, I had mentioned earlier in the episode, my uncle. And while this isn't there's open ended and there's long term. It's interesting to look at long term. And I think long term generally goes with fantasy or some sort of certain sci fi where the world lends itself to that. I understand what you're saying with Star Wars, and there's a never ending fight against evil. But from my perspective of Star Wars, I mean, I don't want to get too deep in the whole Disney versus George Lucas thing or anything like that. But there's an evil that was created there, and there's an evil to defeat, to liberate. And once it's liberated, you've pretty much achieved everything, and that's the end of the story for the most part. Um, and again, I like war games, and so there's long term, and long term is something a little bit different. I'll give you an example, and this is why I bring my uncle. My uncle participated in a war game. He could only tell me so much about it, which wasn't very much because it's secret and all that. But during the Cold War, where they had uh, the Soviets versus the West. It was that kind of NATO Warsaw Pact type of thing. But beyond just wargaming, you started in a tense situation where there wasn't war, and you had people playing leadership roles in government, from Secretary of Defense, POTUS. These were all covered, and there was a geopolitical element to the simulation. Think of a very giant modern version of diplomacy, that kind of thing. And eventually war came along because that was kind of the point. But I like the idea of these kind of massive long-term uh, RPG hybrids. Now everybody was, like I said, was playing a role in that it was role playing. The ultimate issue was more of a military war game contention, kind of like mass battles. They've used that term in role playing, but it was called Proud Prophet, and they ran them several years in the early '80s. And my uncle Peter was involved in them, and I like that idea. You can do these kinds of things with it. It doesn't have to be uh, real world. I could see something like this being done with BattleTech, which is a sci-fi that has a deep geopolitical uh, lore about it, not just giant robots fighting each other. There's the whole backstory of all the individual houses, which are like small principalities for Magenta's sake, because I know you're not familiar with it that much. But it's a large galaxy divided into 4 or 5 major houses and some smaller ones. And there's a lot of depth and lore. And you could play something like that from the perspective of the political leadership, as opposed to just being some ground commander pushing around tanks and so forth. I like that idea. I'd like to see more of that done. So, uh,
I could
any,
see that opens up a whole new element of the game where it's not just necessarily about how good you are at deciding whether to attack from the right flank or the left flank or whatever kind of strategy that you use in the battle itself, but a more overarching strategy like how do you leverage like ally relationships or making a political move that would gain you an advantage versus a military one.
right. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I'm smirking because I see the not everybody's sticking around for this side of the conversation. Some people are very focused on certain particular genres. We try to be a little more expansive and bring in all sorts of different ideas and different places to go. So, but anyway, yeah, and it doesn't have to, like I say, it doesn't have to be modern or sci-fi or anything like that. It can be, you could do something like this from a fantasy perspective as well, and I do it in my system. Um, but
Like what happens if after in Lord of the Rings, after they're done defeating the orcs, um, what happens between the dwarves and men? They both have a lust for gold. So do they go at it afterwards? I've always wondered, like, what happens at the end when it seems like everything is settled and the ring has been destroyed. Does evil just leave the world at that point? I doubt it. Something else is going to come up. I mean, that if the evil was bound in that ring and had the control located within it, what happens when it's destroyed? Does it just now it's just this amorphous thing that goes back to the to its original source, which is the dark shadow side of all people and individuals, right?
well, perhaps there's I think that maybe the well, let's take my Star Wars for example, or any Star
Hmm.
Wars. It don't have to be mine. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think that
You have your
there's
own Star Wars, I know.
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
but it's true. I think that there's if it frustrates me somewhat because I prefer to play the Rebel Empire situation, but a lot of people seem to want to go into the more neutral factions, explore them, and perhaps well, first of all, it doesn't bind you as much because you're open to do about damn near anything you want to do as far as morality or whatever. The other thing is that now you're not bound by some war. You're not bound by victory or defeat. You're just out there making money and doing whatever you want. There the most likely Star Wars campaign that could go in, for a long period of time or potentially endlessly would be people who are operating in the underground, because it is just about constant attainment of power and wealth, no matter what's going on.
Mhm.
Since okay, she
Well,
says since Tolkien's world was ours, will evil continues in new forms? Yeah, there's always kind of confirming Magenta. I can see that. Sure, there's always a way to make up some sort of new threat or something like that. I think again, I people gravitate to what they know, and I tend to gravitate to Star Wars. And sometimes I think that Yuzong Vong War thing, which I don't, homie, don't play that. That ain't my Star Wars, but that's fine. Not everybody has to like everything, but that was seemed to me like a way to kind of come up with a new threat to the galaxy and a new evil to defeat outside of just the Empire Rebellion thing. It's just
well,
something.
when you delve deeper into the origins, at least from my understanding of where you know they came up with the concept of George Lucas came up with the concept of Star Wars based on um, kind of Taoist philosophies and the kind of concept of um, yin and yang and the endless cycle of balance in the universe. So that's why balance is kind of plays such a big role in Star Wars. That there's the good side of the force is always going to be balanced by the dark side of the force. There's just always going to be that, and it's up to you which side you lean towards. But um, it's a never ending cycle, so defeat
Right.
you can't
There's
defeat it. It's just going to ebb and flow back and forth between the two.
so that's right. There's always there there should be a way with most things. If you try hard enough, you want to be creative enough or look for a way that you can, take something like Tolkien or Star Wars and make it possible as far as the narrative to keep going potentially without conclusion. But beyond that, is it possible? Is creating something that merges role playing and complex geopolitical simulations possible? Well, what I was reading from Rob, Kuntz, that was some of the things that he was exploring. There was some questions, there was some answers. From my perspective, again, from what little I know, watching the stuff that I was told about these military exercises in DC back in the 80s, it worked. It was very effective. Granted, it did have a conclusion to it. It wasn't open ended, but it you certainly could have drawn it out longer so that it was something that went on forever. I mean, imagine, say, let's just there's video games that have stuff like this. I'm trying to think of some examples, but and coming up short because I'm old, but just start it. Let's just take the real world, just because it's easy to come up with an analogy or an example, and have everybody take a country and start at 1900 and go for a century and a half, just doing whatever the hell you want, you know, as far as what decisions you want to make, what kind of government you want it to run, things like that. Now, I don't know that there's anything difficult about doing that. I think one of the biggest debate about that being feasible is using rules as opposed to just using rulings. You know what the difference I mean, Magenta?
Right. Hey, BB has some interesting comments here. So for Star Wars, a campaign that goes with Plan B, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, is interesting. In that version, the rebellion remains small and diffuse with no clear leaders. So room for PCs to become the new heroes of the rebellion.
Mhm. Well, I think here's the thing. There is heroes, whether you're in I mean, America had a gigantic army in World War II, but they still had heroes. And I think so. I don't know. I see what you're
So
saying.
you're saying you don't have to have a small group to have
Right.
heroes. You
I
can
don't
have
think so.
heroes amidst a large
I
group.
think
Well,
so.
that's granted, I think.
I think so.
But
Yeah.
yeah. But having no clear leaders is something that I think that's kind of currently occurring in a lot of places where there are people who are doing things without clear leadership, kind of splinter cell type of things. I mean, not always things we like, but I mean, it is a valid way of organizing a rebellion.
Is it?
Uh, Well, I mean, it I suppose it is, but it doesn't ever really, it lends itself to punishment of the population. When you have no leaders, um, it's harder for there to be a resolution of the battle. It just continues because there's no one who's going to be trusted to sign any kind of treaty that says we're going to back off now because there's no leaders. Who do you sign the treaty with? So you end up with more of I don't know how to describe more anarchy, I guess, than anything else in that particular case because there's um, no organization to go to say this is ended now, and no one that everybody's going to listen to. Yeah, you're right about the Star Wars rebellions. Never really was for, but they did eventually organize into where they did have a leadership. Mon Mothma and quite a few leaders. Bill Iblis and some others. Of course, Luke Skywalker and those guys became. They even got medals, so they did become heroes of a
Hmm?
heroic MacGuffin. I'm not sure. Okay, victory was because of a heroic MacGuffin. I'm not sure what a heroic MacGuffin is. Sorry, I told you I was the one who would ask the stupid questions, but
Well, there's. I mean, the one thing with Star Wars is you get into, as far as discussing lore, you get. This is why me and the Disney thing, I don't give it. But there, how do you put this? He wasn't. He wrote something, and what he wrote, he being Lucas, versus everything else that was being written, there's no consistency in anything. He had problems controlling the licensing. One of the reasons that I had people screeching in my ear over the phone asking a simple question to LucasArts when I had a retail store was because Lucas hammered into these people to be dicks about IP because he always felt like he had been screwed over in previous projects. He talked about I don't want to get into a huge lecture about it, but the point is that uh, he'd always felt like he didn't have full control of certain things. The most prominent example, without getting too deep into things, is the holiday special. As he said
oh,
many
that was a
times,
disaster.
he'd love to find every copy of that thing and burn it and want it to go away. It wasn't anything he wanted. And then, ironically, his company licenses stories out to other people. and yeah, they had this kind of encyclopedia of knowledge to draw from, and Lucas insists that he had final stamp on everything that was written. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But one way or the other, there's all sorts of different ways, things went. I made the campaign I made because it was real simple. I had several things. Uh, Firstly, going from the original movie, Crawl, that just was, it didn't have anything about chapter or anything. The chapter 4 part showed up when they re-released the movie in support of Empire Strikes Back. And when I said, wait, what? Chapter 4? Wait a minute. There's only been one movie. What's all this about? And it kept referencing a battle that ended up being the Battle of Scarif, according to Disney or whatever. But uh, I wanted to know that. I wanted to know the origins of the thing. And
You wanted chapter 1, 2, and 3.
right, not
Yes.
the ones I got, but I want, but yes. And what I was interested in is how do these people organize? Who started it up? what kind of actions did they take initially? Where did they get their weaponry? And that was the kind of thing that I was trying to originally get through with on my campaign. But there's always been something that's deflected it a little bit, so we never really got that deep into it. We had people that wanted to take it in different directions, and so which is
That's
fine.
what that's the essence of role playing is that the
Right.
characters take it in different directions, which is where my
Exactly.
next question comes in.
Hmm.
When you're talking about creating a game where there is a an endless game, that would be kind of character driven, right? I mean, if the characters, you would have to find whatever motivates the particular characters that are playing the game to continue it on beyond whatever endpoint would seem natural. If there's like, okay, we've conquered the eastern portion of our lands and we've taken care of the evil wizard or whatever the goal was, and then, okay, but now that we've done that, well, now we want to take on the West. Now we want to expand our power and influence to whatever else is out there. Or you could give them a chance to, take the booty and go retire to the farm somewhere and raise goats and have babies or whatever. But I, you get what I'm saying? It would
Hmm.
be kind of what the character would drive to, you know, choose to continue on with a new and expanded mission, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it has to do with that. You can play, I mean, people can play their character any way they want. At some point, you get tired and you can't do it anymore. So you might want to just retire with what you've had, or like you say, you've all your victory. I've won all my battles. Bring me something new. You know,
Hmm.
and then you come up with something new for them to go find, or they find it themselves. If you're if you're if your world is big enough, then your players should be able to scour the area and eventually find something that they haven't come across yet. Whether that be something in a new villain, a new problem, whatever it is, a new
A new
monster,
mystery or
yeah,
new
whatever form it
riches to
takes.
gain, whatever
Yeah,
your motivation is for your character.
right. Right. But so a lot of it depends on what the theme is. A military, I think they're both viable. I think a lot of people always shun the idea of having a military themed or military centric role playing game as some sort of, you know, I don't know if I've had one guy says, well, what would be the point? You're just taking orders and dying. Yeah. So one of the things I always talk about when I talk about pushing uh, RPG in a new direction. That was what kind of brought this to my mind was reading a Rob Kuntz interview where he was talking about trying to expand it. Is can it be done? Now, does it mean can it be done? Does that necessarily translate into commercially viable or even something that people want to do? Not necessarily, but just the idea of can it? Let's just try it out to see if it works. And it can be done. Like for example, um, role playing a firehouse. I remember there was a game called Fireman, an old arcade game, and that was it. You started in the firehouse. It was a two-player game. You stood behind the other person, and you drove the old fire trucks had a steering mechanism in the trailer as in one in the tractor. So you drove the trailer, the other one drove the tractor, and then the you went from building to building, just from fire to fire, and you got points for it. Was old video game, upright quarter driven video game. So it was all about points in the video game. But I just thought the idea of being a firehouse. And people say, well, what would you do other than chase down fire? I mean, there's not
That
real
seems a
drama
bit
or adventure.
repetitive.
You can only
Right.
save the baby out of a burning building so many times or whatever. Maybe. But uh what about
Yeah, and then you wonder, don't those people have TVs?
yeah.
Right. Where are all the babies coming from? Sorry.
Okay.
I couldn't
but
resist.
but all right. But no, I mean, I would if you were willing to, as an experiment, get involved in role playing a firehouse, and you probably won't find people willing to do that experience because they'll probably just go, "Well, that sounds effing boring." But what might transpire if you role played that out on a regular basis? What kind of conflicts or whatever? They may not be combat conflicts. It may, like you say earlier, it may even come to be more of a drama show or a role or something like that. But you might be able to do it. And I think that there's ways to push boundaries and have a military
I could
centric.
see this is an interesting thought experience, and just to kind of take it a little bit, I don't want to go too far with it, but I could see how you could make a game out of that if you added in some additional elements like an arsonist that you had to track down, so there's a mystery to solve, or a where you were in charge of procuring the resources that the firehouse would need, like obtaining water or budgeting or some kind of things where you have to do that. Um, oh, hey, wow, we lucked out here. Will has experience. As I'm going to read his comment here. I've worked dispatch in a firehouse. It was a corporate firehouse, not public utility. There's tons of things that happen outside of the normal operation that provide content. Yeah, I think you could, if you had the experience to know a little bit more about that world, there's bound to be more than just holding a hose and spraying it. I'm sure there's definitely more complexity to it.
Um, yeah, it's just I mean it may not be the greatest. I saw a uh, what was that one that I saw? It was like AI robotic paramedic RPG, and I was like, well, okay, and I think it was something on Drive Through RPG that I saw, just something unique and different. And where can you take these sort of things? Uh, but with role playing, I or with military role playing, yeah, I mean, okay, the whole well, you just take orders and die. I mean, I don't know. I
You could be the one giving the orders,
it
or
could
you
be
could be, yeah, you could play any number of roles. I mean, if you're in a military unit, um, you could be the scout, you could be the machine gun operator, you could be uh, there could be all kinds of roles in that would be different, working together as a team. It's really not that different from any other kind of you know role playing game where you're playing. Um, I mean, your wizard would be akin to your artillery, I should say, or
right,
that kind of thing. I
right.
I can see how they relate and they could correlate very easily.
It's a matter of
To,
preference. It's what you want to play. I've heard a lot of people say, well, it doesn't mix well. They took Dawn Patrol as an example. Dawn Patrol was a very early TSR, well, not a very early TSR game, but it was a 80s TSR war game. It was about World War One biplanes. And a lot of people always, well, it was kind of boring, or it was, well, of course, you always get complex as a thing. But I mentioned, I go, well, it's an example of merging role playing with wargaming, and I had a counter argument going, well, kind of, yeah, you had a couple of, and I said, not kind of. I said the mistake as far as getting back to long playing games was if you play one scenario with Dawn Patrol, where you try to keep things small because you think it's complicated or takes too long. So you play one guy versus one guy in two planes, and that's it. And you go, see, that's not much of a role playing game. Fair enough. But if you played it the way we played it, and we being guys like Cook, the guy who wrote Mike Cook, who was instrumental in it and wrote it, we would play at Gen Con back in the old days with that was one that was being played all the time. And before Dawn Patrol was a box game that you could buy, it was still out there as other things. They were doing that from day one at that con. I believe, I'd have to verify this, but I believe it was the longest running consecutive traditional thing at Gen Con, bar none. The Saturday morning fur ball with like 100 guys. So you ain't played
Wow.
these games until you played with big numbers and everybody's there to play. If you think it's fun hanging out with 5 or 6 guys at a table in your basement, stand around a table so big that you have to take your shoes off and walk on in order to move your shit around. And there's all these people there, and you're all playing these teams and stuff. And the funnest ones were the long games where you were playing a campaign game, because now the role playing comes into uh, its own, in that you have a character, you have a name, you have an origin, you have a reason why you're fighting, you have a unit that is not only fighting the war, but is, in order for to be motivated, in order to be effective against the enemy, excuse me, you're competing with other units of your same military for kills and such. And there's a personal element to it, as the planes weren't just, they're all painted the same way. You They were billboards, they were the Red Baron and things like that. And over successive missions, you became invested in the guy who made it through. Not everybody made it through. It was real easy to get snapped, especially in the first 2 missions, which is the way it was. The cream rose to the top, and you had guys like the Red Bear, von Richthofen, and Eddie Rickenbacker, and these guys who made it through more because of luck than anything at first. But as they made it through, they gained experience, just like role playing, and that made them better. They learned when to get into a fight, when not to get into a fight, and they became more effective. And as your guy grew, if he did, he gained notoriety, he gained decoration, and he started to become a celebrity amongst his peers. Glory. So all you needed to do on top of that was to find a way to compensate these people. Usually the medals and all that it wasn't really about getting rich. It was about getting famous and staying alive. And that longer play made it a deeper game and a more of a role playing game than even a military game. But most people were oh, no, too complicated, so they never tried it. But I did, and you missed out. It was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of
Well,
fun.
I do want to take a time to, because I played that game that you set up just as a test and just for my own, to kind of learn how they go. I did play a D-Day game on June 6th. We played together on that, and I did notice where there would be in that particular game there was a small, company level game, right? Or was it? No, it wasn't company level. It was
Squad. It was a squad level game.
squad level. Yeah, squad level game. Very similar. It felt very similar to like what you would play with a role playing game where you would have, um, you know, 6 to 12 players or whatever. Um, and it was very, very interesting actually because you could get that feeling. Um, because like I've played war games before, like just on the strategic level ones, the ones with the chits. I played Hearts of Iron, a computer war game, and you're really kind of you have a stack of troops, and when something happens to them, you're kind of missing that, like, something happened to these guys, I lost, you know 20 guys or whatever, but you don't feel it doesn't feel like a real thing in the it's kind of like you're just counting the numbers and how many of the stack is gone, kind of thing. Whereas playing it as a role playing game, when I lost just a single guy in my unit, I felt it, and it was a kind of impactful, and it felt very much like role playing.
Right.
Um,
It. Mm-hmm. She. Right. That's that. And there's several things. One of the other discussion points was the mechanics needed for something like this, and that's what like I said, I've gotten to the point where I just almost want to throw them out. If you've got somebody that knows their stuff, they can be a good GM. They can make a ruling as opposed to reading a rule and it play out well and be a lot easier for the players to learn. The other thing GM needs to do is to keep it fresh, to keep it interesting, and to provide drama situations like Magenta's talking about. The third big ingredient IMO is more players, less NPCs. If you're going to play something like she's talking about, we played out. Now she had a lot of fun doing it, but she was the only person playing there. Now she she was playing about 10 guys, and personifying them was the first step. And that was talked about years ago in the 60s. Was one of the first times even before I was born, it was some old book that I got out of some dime store or whatever. And it was a guy named Joseph Munchauser III. And he discussed this very thing, that once you put some personality, once you put some humanity in the unit you're playing, it changes the war game more to a role-playing game
Yeah,
in his mind. Because
I
now
can
they're not,
attest to that.
yeah, now they're not little automatons or toy soldiers being bowled over by little guns. Now they're your boys, your guy. Pardon the sexual, but
They had names. I mean,
right,
these guys, you
your
gave them
guys,
names, you gave them character.
right,
One guy even freaked out because he thought he heard a tiger tank, and then
yeah,
it influenced all the rest of the squad members to be, hunkered down, and because, they heard sounds like a tiger, and everybody freaked out, which, is reasonable considering. But yeah, it was very much more like real people would act rather than just, oh, you have bad morale. I'm going to take you
right,
can only move, less spaces. No, this one guy who had a name actually said something that influenced everybody else, and it made it feel like that could really happen.
right. That's, I mean, yeah. You got to get, Moonchester talked about it. And then later on, a guy named Gene Kelly talked a lot about it in his periodical, that you got to put a face, to these people and a personality to them. And that get rid, and I believe this with fantasy role playing as much as wargame or anything like that. And that's why I have this system that I've developed the way I've developed it, where it's a narrative discussion. It isn't, you're not being hit by a +2 sword. We're not
Yeah.
going to say, whoa, okay, I'm attacking. I'm using a +2 sword. You roll the die. Oh, a hit. You've done 6 points of damage. Yay. No, 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 no. It's going to be we're going to call your guy Conan just for simplicity's sake. But so Conan swings his mighty bastard sword and cleaves the enemy, at the shoulder length down, and whatever it is. There'll be some interesting way of explaining what's going on that doesn't make it antiseptic by using a bunch of technical rule terms that break immersion, and people go, they start going, this sounds like I've taken part 47 and inserted it into the
Mm,
space provided. Sounds very clinical. Sounds like you're talking about building something as opposed to playing a game. So when you change morale break for some guy spazzing out because he thinks he's about to take on this famous juggernaut tiger, in reality it was a half track, but he would just hit the ground. He didn't know he's a greenhorn. All he knows is his older brother told him about having a tangle with this tiger back in Africa a couple years ago, and the thing was this behemoth. So uh, that kind of thing, different phobias and stuff like that. So when you create a character in my system, you'll have advantages and disadvantages, and that'll help you as a role player to kind of, you can choose them or you can have them randomly assigned. But sometimes
wow.
just phobias like that, you might be the biggest baddest mother on the block, but like Indy can take a beating from 12 Nazis and get drug across the ground on a, but why did it have to be snakes?
Oh,
Shit
thanks.
like that.
Yeah. I just want to say goodbye to Bibi. Thanks for joining us. It was a
Yeah,
lot of fun having you here. And Will, I don't know if you've been seeing Storm because you've been talking, but Will was kind of backing up what you said here too with some of his own comments. Um, so yeah, I think it's true that I don't see any reason why you couldn't do wargaming the same way that you do role playing, especially on that squad level where you have people coming in.
right.
So interesting conversation. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I think it's definitely possible. Having firsthand experience, it was enjoyable too. So just want to put that out there too.
Right, and the more people. This is why I'm again another big reason I'm a proponent of large player numbers in games is the more humans you have, the more humanity you have in the interaction. No matter how good a GM you are, it's not the same. And this is, I think, why people always go, well, I hate that VTT stuff because I like to be face to face. Now, in my opinion, VTT has come to the point where computers in general, where you have enough resolution, the audio is good enough, you know, you can probably see more of my face than I want you to. You remember? I don't know if you're old enough. Whoever's old enough, do you remember when HD first came on? And all of a sudden you could see all the specks and zits on the chick's face behind the news desk where you couldn't see them before because it wasn't just the makeup. That higher definition had brought out flaws that normally were glossed over by the resolution and stuff like that. And you could see it in a lot of things. And uh,
I actually realized that, hey, Hollywood people get zits too. I didn't even
right,
know they could.
you're right. So, uh, but it's that you get. So I understand it, but I think that VTT's done a good job of being able to read somebody's expression and stuff like that. So I mean, you can see all the wrong. The hair's not going all right directions and shit like that. So, um, but the more humans you have playing, whether it be face to face or online, uh, the more humanity you get in the interaction. So, and if you can develop a camaraderie, Gen Con is still the greatest show on earth gaming, and I've had no more fun anywhere than at Gen Con playing these games. And I remember playing a Star Wars game, of course, because me, and it was uh, Star Wars Space Combat, and there must have been 50 people playing this thing. It wasn't a huge scenario, but there were squadron commanders for each thing and all that. And I was playing, and I did real well. Um, and I had some guy come up to me. Now I don't even know the man. Wasn't playing right next to him, but came up and he said, "I saw you at that Star Wars. You did this thing, man." And he, I mean, just that camaraderie. So we signed up to go play another one. I got talking to him for about 5 minutes. He's like, "Are you going back to do the other one?" I'm like, "Well, I got this thing." I'm like, and he talked me into it. We went back and we played, and we were like this, standing there, just once you get you know, connected with somebody in that way, and you can play at the table that way as the whole band of brothers type of idea, especially with the kind of wargaming that I'm talking about or Magenta's talking about, where there's a handful of men. You can really personify it, and it becomes something more deep than just, you know, I'm firing my M1 at this crowd over there, that kind of thing. Um, it
Right.
was it was a blast, and um, really loved that kind of gaming, and that's why I brought this up. It was interesting to hear Rob talk about it, or well, to read Rob talking about it. It was a written article, but to see what he had to say about it. And I want less rules. I've gotten to the point you may hear me or see me on Twitter bitching about people complaining about rules because I always was kind of one. I always thought that was kind of a hyperbolic thing. But I've gotten to the point where you can't win. It's that cliched reaction to rules has become ingrained in the conversation in gaming. So, but it
Well, Storm, I just want to
gets
jump
me
in
ahead.
here and say it's kind of, we've discussed this in the past before, and I see where you're going with that. I think that that's one of the key elements that's been missing from the wargaming that role playing games have had, and that is someone to manage the rules of the game in the background so that the players can just focus on the more fun aspects and the more immersive aspects of the game. When you're the one sitting there with the rule book and you've got the charts and you've got the numbers and you're rolling the dice and determining what you get, there's no way that you don't break immersion in doing all of that and having to write down your list of factors and things that would affect your whatever scoring system you've got or whatever rules sets you've got to work with. It all. automatically takes you into a place where you're managing all of these things in a very analytical way
Mhm.
versus that immersive experience of getting the adrenaline going when you realize that you're up against a battle against a superior force, and you have to figure out a way to get out without half of your team dying, and you know, you're hoping things go well and you're waiting for the answer to find out if that you know, that shot you took with the anti-air missile or whatever made it hit its target. You know, that really brings some excitement to it because you can fully immerse in it without having to stop and calculate things. So the game master's role is kind of one that could bring that experience into the wargaming sphere the same way that it's done with the role playing games.
Right. It imbalance. Everything becomes the same thing. It doesn't matter. That's why I briefly brought up, role playing a firehouse. My point was is that it doesn't matter where you're at. If you've got somebody that can be the arbiter in whatever you're doing, whether it be some combat orientated thing or, you know, do you know there's a Dallas role playing game, Magenta? Do you know that, by the way?
Dallas?
Yeah, Dallas. And
You mean like the 70s TV show Dallas?
yeah,
Like Who Killed JR Dallas?
right. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I'm aging myself the more I talk about that because I
right,
know that show. But yeah, okay.
there was
I did
and
not know there was a role playing game.
right, right. And it was a gimmick. I was trying to think of the other one that was really hilarious.
The
Like,
A team would have made more sense.
right, right. But and here's the
Yeah.
thing. Now, when I talk about uh, paracosmic convergence, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now, people go, "Well, you can't do that. IP, you got to have the license." Well, do you really though? I mean, here's the thing. I'm not getting on the live telling people to plagiarize major corporations or anything like that. But there's a point where you can just go, "What rules? What IP am I violating?" You're telling me that, that explain to me this. If me and my five buddies, whether we're four or whatever it would be, let's see, yeah, I got to figure it out. There's Hannibal, there's Face Man, uh, let's see, what was there, four of them, five of them, whatever it was. If me and those many buddies go, we're going to play this out in our backyard because we thought the TV was cool or the TV show was cool or whatever. There ain't no IP violation there. It's just a bunch of people have an imagination. So if you come to say Command Post Gaming as a service and say we want to do an A team thing, I don't know. I forget which network owns a team, but they can come and because there's nothing you can do. I haven't printed anything out. This isn't some product I'm selling to you. What I'm doing is
Well,
I'm well, but
if
I'm
you're using the character names and that
even
is
that,
copyrighted, I
even
don't
that.
know. I think they could get you for that, but
I don't think they could. But the point is that even at that point, even if it isn't, uh, I, I don't need a rule book one way or the other. If you're
right,
coming to somebody like me, we used to do all sorts of stuff. Did we always do A team? No, we didn't do A team, and I'm older than that. But I mean, I watched the show, but we weren't kids at the point playing with guns when that was coming around. By that time, we were a little bit older than that. But whatever it was, Rat Patrol was one. Of course, that's World War II. You can't copyright that anyway. But we didn't have to do Rat Patrol. We could just do, something that went, World War II in the desert. You can
hmm
you've got this verisimilitude to be able to do anywhere you want to go without having to read a
right.
bunch of rules, without anything like that. So what's the difference between this and rule zero for the people who go, well, rule zero, those people are a little bit, because it's still being uh arbitrary, it's still being educated. It's not just some story being told to semi-active participants. Let me play it to you this way. If I a lot of people say, if I have, they'd be like, okay, I want to play a World War II game, and I'd go and I'd grab 50-year-old or damn near 50-year-old Panzer leader, and they go, well, that looks like an antique. It's made out of four colors. It's older than dirt. It's not very pretty, and it looks complicated. Okay, what if we
And
played it?
somebody might have spilled a beer on it.
Yeah, I lost a lot of. I had a really great collection of that shit. Some dumb drunk spilled a beer all over and ruined it all. Um, mm, but But what if I just sat you down and said, you don't have to learn anything. You don't have to worry about the complicated rules. All you have to do is play the game because I'm going to arbitrate it for you. And they still go, yeah, but it still looks like it was printed in the 19th century because it's kind of ugly. So, all right. So instead of worrying about who produced it, when it was produced, what it looks like, or any of that shit, just sit down and say, okay, you want to play something in 1944 France during World War II, and just go with that without having to worry about, am I going to play Panzer Blitz? Am I going to play Squad Leader? Am I going to do any of that kind of stuff? Just sit down and do it all. That was kind of what I was talking about with the fire department thing. Is you can just choose it and go with it, but you don't have to
Well,
worry
you
about.
do have to have some like parameters and guidelines. I would assume that you would have those, like like what is the value of like if you were doing a firefighter simulation, you would have to have like rankings for how big of a fire it is and what kind of challenge it would be to fight it and what kind of tools you
Sure,
have and what their power is. And so you would still have it, but that would be all. I guess you're saying that would be all what the game master does to
sure,
make the thing work so that
right.
you as a player you don't have to do all of the math and the complicated part yourself. You can
That's
just
right.
enjoy the experience.
Right. And if it's something that's popular, we go back to the original intent here, the endless thing. If you enjoy it and you want to keep coming back, it get what's what stops any of it from being something that's continuous? As long as you have somebody in a game master that's capable of bringing you fresh material every week. You know, like we said, we talked about token, and well, okay, what happens once you cast the ring into the fire? Then what? Well, there's all these other evils. There's all these other places. There's all these other ideas that can be generated to further the thing after that conclusion. So there, now granted, again, this is why I put in uh, long term and open ended, because if you're going to fight, say you're going to role play fighting a war, usually there's a conclusion to the war. Fair enough, but you still have, it's still a completely different experience to fight in a tabletop MMO type of situation in a war than trying to wedge role playing into some skirmish level game like Recon did. And I love Recon from Palladium. Recon was a role playing game that was spawned from a set of 1/72nd scale miniature rules for Vietnam. And I could play that game right now with a bunch of people and have a bunch of fun. Now, a lot of people didn't like the mechanics, but people said, how far can you really take something in Nam? Well, here again, I think they may be right, but also it might just be a matter of imagination, because I heard some pretty weird stories about Nam that didn't have anything to do about. Do you know there was a pizza delivery service? You ever hear this story?
Yeah, you did tell me about that.
Do you hear me tell
Well,
you the
that's
pizza delivery stories?
yeah, you told me about that. But that's something that I've always had a question about because World War II obviously was world war. So I mean the whole world was involved and it was a big thing.
Right.
But Vietnam was a big consequential thing.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yet there's no war games, no interest or any of that.
Magic. Well, there is quite a few actually. I don't know how. I don't know why they're
They
not
don't get
played.
the attention though.
They don't anymore. But I think wargaming has been on and off, and maybe the exposure is different or whatever. Um, I don't know. Maybe you need a common frame of reference. Was there a lot of Vietnam stuff? You know, and the country kind of had to heal. I don't think you see a lot of that kind of thing as far as copyright till after like '84, till after like Rambo. There probably
Uh,
was a time in the late '70s where we don't want to talk anymore about that shit because it was bad, and there was all the
right.
ugliness
And
that
that
came after it. So, but yeah,
yeah.
it's
But
good.
and like Will was saying too, I imagine when you're in a war, every war is a forever war. And I think that's definitely true for Vietnam. For a lot of the guys that came back,
Sure, it
it's
never
a
goes away.
forever war for them. They're never going to forget, and
Right.
maybe that's why. There's not as much interest in playing that out, or just the outcome of the war um, part of it. But I've often wondered though if it's also partly logistics. How hard is it to play a war game like that where you're just in the jungle, where your visibility is? I mean, I could see that being a challenge to play because it was a challenging war. It was a mix of like civilians and I don't know. I could see that being a little bit harder of a game to play because it wasn't as clear cut as like where it was with the World War II was a little more. The enemies were always forces. It was more of a guerrilla war in Vietnam where you had the actual people of the nation were in some cases involved as well, and it was hard to tell which side anybody was on.
Right. Well, and that actually lends itself to a better role playing situation. But
Mm,
you know, it, it there's all sorts of things you can come up with really in that kind of scenario as far as looking for them. There was people that were doing nothing but trying to root out infiltrators in places like Saigon because they would do that. They would interact with American servicemen. They would get jobs at places that tended to serve American servicemen, and they would act like they were South Korea or South Korean, excuse me, Vietnamese, and then they would pull some shit. Pardon my French. Um, drop put a bomb in there or something. There wasn't as much of that as you probably see in movies, but there was some of it. All sorts of things like that. So there was a lot of really interesting uh, tasks that you could perform in, say, like recon, that emulated the kind of weird or counterinsurgency type of war that was going on in recon. What people say is that no matter what, though, you still end up playing a a a small list of different missions that all can't be all that much different. And I said, well, there's a couple of things. First of
mm,
all, I found that over the years of just playing the Star Wars game, that there's some people that don't mind that at all. They
oh,
don't care. And second of all, it's just the limit of your imagination. There's all sorts of ways to stretch those things out and do it differently. As far as the mechanics involved, this is another interesting thing. A lot of people will talk about, well, how are you going to use mechanics? And again, it the whole premise that I have finally started to embrace is the free Kriegspiel premise, where you don't have rules to the to or I could go without any, but I know that no matter what people say about I don't like rules, they want to roll them bones. When they're shooting at somebody, it's they want to shoot some dice. So you
well,
can
that makes sense. People don't want to think that the result is arbitrary. So
exactly
it does make sense. And rolling the dice gives you that feeling of you being in charge
control,
in some
right?
way. The outcome is yours.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, you take it may be a token physical action because it's random chance really that decides, but
hmm
your hands are in it.
hmm hmm And you'll find all this with a lot of people too is that no matter how much they complain about the complexity of rules, when you hand them rules, they want to know how the sausage is made. There's a couple of reasons why that is. They may be searching through them to make sure that they meet up to their perceptions of reality or good game design, or and most people aren't going to admit that they do this, but you do, is you're looking for that hole to exploit because a lot of
Oh,
people.
I'll admit to that, but that's not as easy to do with a game master or dungeon master led game as it is with computer games. Computer games, the ones that I played, like the real time strategy games, like Clone Campaigns was one of the early ones that I started with on that. I mean, I kept playing against a superior opponent. I will not name right now, but a superior opponent who beat me every time for the first like 6 months to a year that I played that game until I really dug into the rules and found out how to exploit a couple of features of the game. And then I couldn't lose after that. And it was the tables had turned. And
Mhm,
so as long as you find that one rule you can exploit, and if you keep it to yourself, you can keep winning.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
same's true with the, especially if you're playing against a computer opponent, because they just, yeah.
Right. Um, it can be a boring thing to play a computer. A computer like there was me and her played a lot of our real time strategy games. We played one called Empire Earth 2. Fairly famous. Most of you probably have heard of it, if not played it.
Oh, that's it's still one of my favorites actually for that type of game. Yeah.
Had a really exceptional AI for its age. And it was challenging more so than most of its contemporaries in my opinion. And that was great until it started to hit those flaws. And two flaws were that if you could hold out long enough, it just would mentally. I know it's not really a mental thing. But it would just stop. It would just go,
It would
okay,
get
I
depressed and
can't
give
win.
up.
It just
It,
and
it would just not get out of bed in the morning
right.
anymore.
It
It
would
wouldn't
fight
show up to even attack you or anything.
if you could hold off two or three of its very well timed, very well done attacks, it normally would just go, all right, I give up, and would just exist. And there was a point if you went long enough that when you got there, it wasn't even running patrols anymore. Everything was just static, dead,
To
like it
be
had just.
fair, though,
Uh,
that was only the Ottoman Empire that would do that. And there were others, like if you were playing against Austria or Germany, I can't remember which one, but it was one of those two that they would just never give up. You could knock out everything, but if you left one worker alive, they would be build a new
right.
command plus and they would just keep
It,
going.
right. And to the point where it wasn't a tactic, but an annoyance because they had one thing left. They couldn't build anything more, but they would hide it in this place you could never find it and stuff like that. So, but bottom line is you would eventually find the limit of that challenging AI. Find the or there was the if you use the right uh, uh, feature, it would it would never endingly create workers and send them to you to be converted by these towers that you created to the point
Oh,
where
they
you
were
had so many
big
of them you
towers.
throw them like cannon fodder at. So point without getting into any further detail because we're talking about tabletop, but point is that eventually an AI is going to be you're going to find that limit of challenge, beat it, and then you've got nothing. Whereas if you play with other people on a face to face thing, you're it's never ending. You know.
Well, a human game master or game designer or um, dungeon master is able to adapt to the level of the player, which is where you can get an endless game more so than like Empire Earth. I could still play it now, but I know I'm going to win every single time because I know exactly how to exploit the AI. I know exactly to pick these two civilization bonuses, and that will let me get right in his back door and build, and he's just got no chance after that.
Right.
So unless I'm distracted watching TV, I'm going to win every single time, and that's not really a challenge. It's not fun anymore. But
Right.
if you got a human game master, or dungeon master, or someone who can see that this isn't challenging enough for you, they can throw a couple of interesting monkey wrenches at you that make it feel like you're accomplishing something rather than just going through the motions.
Right. Right. Like Will says, it's got to have some sort of prompt or initiation for it to. But with a GM, even in wargaming, one of these long term games, something like that, you get to the point where you start playing off the people instead of playing off the adventure or playing off the chart, and that's how you keep it fresh. That's how we do it. I just started to get like I had a here's the thing. I had a great example is um, let me get this guy's name. What was this? I don't want to just call him what we referred to. It's not that bad, but I don't want to do it on live. Whatever. He was an alcoholic. His character was an alcoholic. His character was, and he was playing Star Wars with me. And just after a few episodes, few sessions, and talking with him between the sessions, just as a person, me and him, I got to know enough about him that I could play off of him, and I could throw things in front of him that I knew he wasn't expecting just because I'd spent a little time with him, and I could do more of that the more I knew somebody to keep it fresh. That's an easy way to keep things going in a long term game without having to use charts and books and stuff like that. You just need a good imaginative GM, and that's what we provide is imaginative GMs. Now, if you're playing some sort of war, I mean, we can just arbitrate war games too. I like a good Kriegspiel or, like I said earlier, a Panzer leader or something like that. So if you just want to have a chess math with match with tanks, but you don't want to be checking a CRT every time you take a shot, we can cover you there too.
Yeah.
But the techniques we use, like we said, to do this are fairly simplistic, and it just gets the rules out of the way. But again, with the math rocks, like Will says, well, a lot of people want to shake it. They want to have something, so we can sit you down with a real basic combat system. We can show you enough that you can just like Magenta's a great example. Magenta hadn't played Star Wars role playing games. She hadn't played very many at all. All we really needed to explain to her is how the dice pool system worked. Everything else you can pick up as you go. That's pretty much how she learned what she knows of Star Wars RPG. Am I correct, Magenta?
Yeah, I started off as a complete newbie, and I did ask some questions in between game sessions just to kind of try and make sure I wasn't taking up everybody's time with like learning as you go. But for the most part, I really just basically learned the basics, really basic. I mean, and then just went at the direction, you know, just followed what seemed logical and played it out as my character would have reacted. And that's how it went. And then, I would know was I successful or not because, you know, I'd roll the dice and then I didn't have to look it up in the book myself. You know, just got an immediate answer of this is what happened when you rolled the dice that way. So worked out pretty good. I enjoyed it. Because
Right.
that's one of the things that kind of kept me from ever trying. Because Storm had been trying to get me to play these games for quite a long time, and I really didn't. I felt like they were over my head. I felt like I would have to do a lot of. Like he showed me a couple of the books, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I would just have to spend like months reading this to figure out what all this. Some of them read like stereo instructions, to be honest, and I'm like, "Okay, I could probably do this, but I have a job and I have other obligations, and I don't know how I fit that in." So, to make it simplified in a way that makes it entertaining instead of feeling like I'm having to take a college course to prep for it was that's what swayed me over to get me to actually try it out. And now that I have, I really do enjoy game playing. So, I think it's kind of cool that I get to play with this too because I bring in an element that's not usually in a part of the game. A lot of these games I kind of want to say are not as attractive to folks like myself, because they do seem to be kind of more of a guy thing. Honestly, I just put it out there. And I've usually been the only girl playing at the table for a while, um, but I have learned that they're a lot of fun, and I'm glad that you talked me into it, Storm.
But great, good. And that's another thing is to get more people involved, regardless of their origin, background, or what have you, things like that. Just play the game and enjoy it. Um, so, but I really did want to. I, we just tend to chat with these things. Will's talking. I call it the writers' room hustle in the world of darkness, where that's in another RPG. Uh, right. A lot of people talk about the collaborative effort, and I agree. You can have a lot of that player GM interaction, um, to create the world you're in to some degree. I do like to personally have everything set up. I like to have a world that I've got full control over, and I have to be careful that I'm not taking anything away from a player, but I've pretty much mastered that at this point. But early on, I was thinking, no, 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 you're not supposed to do it this way. I've got to control out of it. So um, I, I used rules for that in the past. Now I just, work with it, work with people and understand how they, you know,
Oh,
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 hello.
it's Captain Van. I just realized who Will is. Captain
Oh,
Van.
you didn't know? Oh, I should have
I
told
didn't
you.
know. No, I didn't know. I didn't know his other real name. I'm so sorry. Well, okay. But thank
Mhm,
you. Glad to be the medic.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, so I I just I started this whole thing out well. I started my Twitter account out at least with the idea of trying to get large player games in extended scenarios. Infinitum would be great, just some not never ending thing. I think that my fantasy world and the paracosmic convergence system, even if you don't use the rules that come with it, I've got world after world. What I did with that was we mentioned A Team earlier, was just take the places that were imagination, that drove our imagination when I was a kid, and they're their own worlds. You might go from uh, the fantasy world that I mentioned earlier, that's filled with these little principalities that are kind of rubbing on one another, and all sorts of intricacies going on there. And find one of these. The premise is that there's portholes that lead to different worlds. There are there's at least one in each world. If you find it, you'll go to another one of these creations. If you if you become a GM, if you buy the product and you want to run your own system, you can connect your world, if you create one, to the network of other worlds, should you desire. And your players walk through this, and it can completely change things. You can be uh, shooting arrows and swinging swords, and walk into a world where they're shooting laser guns or something like that.
Okay, now I got a question for you on that.
Mm-hmm.
If you were, say you took like all of, and I wanted to say real quick too, sorry, Will, if I didn't recognize you. I don't have I can't visualize, so I don't really have the ability to recognize people all the time from images. So sorry about that. I didn't mean to neglect you that way. But yeah, I mean, if you were, say you started off and it was like Star Wars you were playing, and you have, laser pistols and all of the Star Wars gear, and you go through a portal and you end up in a world that is, um, I don't know, the Smurfs versus Gargamel. Do you keep your same weapons? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. You probably wouldn't end up in that world, but that could be fun in a way. But I mean, what would happen to your weapons? Would they just automatically convert to the weapons in the world that you landed in,
Oh
or
no,
no? You'd still have your laser. So I could shoot Gargamel with a blaster rifle and save the Smurfs. That would be easy.
could happen. But here's
It
the
could
thing:
happen.
could
Okay.
happen. Gargamel could take one in his big fat nose and have it burned off. But here's the thing: the way that so I I guess what you're inferring is, how do you maintain balance in a situation where you've just transcended several centuries of technology or something like that?
Right. Yeah, that is what I'm wondering. If I go back in time and I've got World War II style weapons, and but I'm going up against Napoleon. That's a no brainer. Then Napoleon's going to die.
Right. One of the things I did with this is I have a real issue with cliche conversation. It drives me nuts. Complexity. a phrase that was used a lot was in the weeds, wonky, clunky, that kind of stuff. That the other one was where I saw a lot of people talking about murder hobos. So yeah, so what I do is okay, you got a problem with people who just slaughter everything in sight. That's a very nutshell explanation of the murder hobo thing. All right. Well, first way we do that is to make and I just heard a lot of people talking about this too, incidentally, about risk, about having risk. And this was a conversation on Twitter that included Rob Kuntz again. He's kind of become a theme here. He's recently become more active on Twitter, and he's again one of the originals, one of the creators of modern role playing, if you will, and so thus his name's invoked a lot. But they were talking about risk involved, and so I make things very risky. You don't you can you can get harmed very quickly. And now, of course, when I say that, so that's one way to get rid of murder hoboing. It's you don't just go, oh well, sure, there's five hobgoblins over there, and I'm level 15 or whatever. I can go wipe the floor with those five and steal all their loot or whatever. Maybe, but that doesn't mean they might get lucky. They might get one of their spears in your eye, something, bad things can still happen. No one walks away from a fight looking as clean as they did when they got into it. That's just reality. So that's one way. Now, when you hear that and you go, okay, well, now it's even worse if you tell me I'm going to go start, shooting bows and arrows at laser pistol guys. Yeah, don't start nothing, won't be nothing. If you want to find a way around, if you want to find a way out of the procurement that you've put yourself in, and here's the other thing: you're not going to get thrown through one of these portholes. You're not going to get, is it possible that you could unwittingly be put through one? Anything's possible in the game. I don't like railroading. I don't like restrictions, but no, you're not. Normally, it's going to be the majority. It's going to be a choice, and that choice should be informed. There's always a way to find out where that thing's going. And can I stop a creator whom buys the product and says, I'm going to create a world? Can I stop them from omitting that from their world? I can't. But I strongly suggest, for this very reason, for the balance issue, that you put in, don't make it easy. It doesn't have to be easy, but there should be a way for them to research or to come across information that explains to them at least in a way that they can understand, even if they can't, even if they're too far back to completely comprehend what a laser pistol is, they should understand that you're going to a weird place. And then they can make that informed decision. But yeah, you can get wiped out real quick. But there's ways to get around that. You can go find weaponry of the sort on your own. You can go find somebody that can help you train on that sort of thing. So it doesn't sound appealing until you try it, because it isn't half as bad if you're just going, well, I'm just going to walk into it and some stormtrooper is going to wipe my, Neanderthalic ass out or whatever. No. And just because, you can Ewok that stormtrooper. I know I'm using Star Wars parlance. I'm a real big Star Wars guy. I can't stop myself, but you know what? You can beat a Ewok too. Those troops didn't walk out there scot-free on that one. They can get the bolo up their ass or whatever it is. So there's still ways to do it, but yeah, it's going to make you think. It's going to make you solve your problems in a way that doesn't have anything to do with conflict, because you're going to lose that conflict if you start it, at least at first. So, but I just like the idea of mixing and mashing things up and having everything connected, because what it is it's kind of a theme. Paracosmic is I didn't know what the hell it meant. I never even heard the word. It came up when I was searching for something else. And basically what it means is a child's imagination, a world created through a child's imagination. It's a fancy clinical term for that. And ironically, in the example, they gave some examples, and one was Tolkien's Middle Earth, which is funny because he wasn't really a child, but fair enough. So I thought, well, that's exactly what I'm looking for. What I want to do is I want to play in the worlds that were dreamed up. They weren't all just sprouted from network TV like the A-Team or Star Wars. There were worlds we came up with on our own. and I wanted to create a role playing game where I could play role playing in those worlds. To me, that's me going back in time. That's as close as I'll ever get to being able to relive my childhood or something like that. And then I wanted to bring it to the rest of the people. And I wanted them to be able to take their childhood or their imagination, adult or whatever, and attach it to it so that you have a tapestry of that sort of thing connected by these portals. And that's why you might have a technology.
That leads to an interesting thought experiment. So if you were, I mean, I guess anyone who's going to be playing the game could just give input on what their world would be as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, I have a
right?
full
Just
world creation. So, yeah, it comes completely with world creation help. Yeah, you can make up your own.
based on your favorite story or your just complete
Right.
imagination.
Yeah,
Okay.
make up your own. Sure. hmm It's a
Like
guide.
John Carter of Mars could wrestle
Sure.
Godzilla.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anything like that.
That
It's
could
all.
be cool. I could see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I wanted people to be able to, and I wanted a system that was capable of doing that without learning a bunch of new rules. So you can. It's more just like I mentioned before, the Gary Bloom guy, where I said he just had enough of learning all sorts of different rules and just wanted to generalize one set. That was what I wanted this to be as well, where you could just, you know, today we want to go play
Once,
the Civil war game.
uh,
Okay, I've got everything for a war game. You don't even have to role play. If you just want to line up soldiers and start shooting at each other, great. I got that handled too in the mass battle section. If you want to role play it like it's the North versus, North. What was the term of that? What was the name of that mini series with all the
the blue and the gray.
blue and the, yeah? If you want to go do that, you can do that. Wherever you want to go with it. It's set up for role playing and war gaming. I like the idea of melding the two together. So yeah, that was what the product is. Now, after reading what Rob has done, I should be. You know what I should do is I should give you the link here. I keep mentioning something, and I don't give
Wait,
you the
wait,
link.
wait, wait. Hold on. I just want to confirm because, look, so like we could have Star Wars versus Star Trek then, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you could. Sure, you could.
Ha
Yep.
ha ha ha.
That's the other. That's the other great thing about it because, like I say, can I go sell you a bunch of stuff that says Star Trek on it? No, but I can say here's how you do it. Now, if you want to go do whatever you want as far as weaponry or technology or anything, it's there. And I'm far from the first person to do this. There's a lot of people that made Star Trek that wasn't Star Trek because they didn't want to get sued. Where you look at it and you hear this is a tricorder. It's not called a tricorder, but it's a tricorder. So you got that. So you have the opportunity to take it to the IPs you want to without getting sued. Because they can't come after you for what you do in your own home, no matter, well, at least not yet. But anyway, but they might be able to
Yeah.
send the Pinkertons after you or something like that. Did you know that? Magenta, you might not understand the Pinkerton reference.
Oh,
There
the Pinkertons. Yeah, I know who the Pinkertons were.
there was something that was sent to somebody inadvertently by Watsy, and they sent a kind of Pinkertons to this guy's place to recover it. Who was a little
Corporate
overzealous.
police.
What's yeah.
Oh, I want to play a RoboCop world too. That would be cool.
So you can do that, or you can make up your own, and you can mash them all together without having to go. Like I've seen sort of things where you go, what if I wanted to use this set, but I wanted to do this with it? And well, here's your conversion chart. Here's how I would take this stat and convert it to this kind of, those kind of things you see in the people that are listening. If there's any out there still, you might know what I'm talking about. Trying to convert one system to the other and all that. I didn't want to have to go through that anymore. I wanted to say, okay, this thing can do whatever I want. You know, I got it. I
Right.
got
Like just because Star Trek, or I mean Star Wars had the rules for um what do you call it? Oh gosh, why can't I remember? The Star Trek, I mean Star Wars game that we're playing has the rules from what was the name of it?
what
The
was
rule system that the Star Wars game is running on.
You mean West End games? You talking about the West End
Yeah,
games?
yeah. I was
Yeah.
just drawing a blank.
Yeah.
Versus like if you were to play a Dungeons and Dragon game would be a D20 system.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to
Oh,
worry about converting between the two, going
oh,
from
you're
the
referring to
D6
D6.
to
Yeah. Okay.
the
That's
yeah, exactly.
right.
Sorry, I'm just had occasionally lately I've had trouble getting my words together.
I know the
I'm taking
feeling.
some yeah, I'm taking some vitamin B6 for it. Hopefully, will help.
Right. But yeah, that's it. That kind of thing where you had to make those kind of conversions or other types of things and just go, same with the service that we're providing. It doesn't matter where you're at. What do you want to do today? What do you want to play? What do you want me or staff to run for you? You know, car racing, fighter jets,
Never car racing. You know I
yeah,
can't drive.
hunting dragons, Sequest, whatever, you know. And
Oh, Sequest.
right, Star Trek
Are you
underwater.
talking about the show from like the 1990s, the one
Yeah, with Roy Scheider.
with the dolphin?
Hmm.
Yeah, Roy Scheider, and then they had the kid who could talk to dolphins.
Yeah, you can do
Yeah,
anything.
that was I remember that was a good show.
And all I've got is what I've and again, like I mentioned at the very beginning about Dunnigan saying plagiarize, 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 just influences the influence from D6 and from Star Wars with the skill check system, the influence of the combat thing I kind of came up with my on my own, but that's kind of been something that's been rattling around in my head for a long time. So a real basic combat system, and uh, just so that again players have the ability to throw some dice and know what they're shaking for and know what it means. There wouldn't be any fun if you go here, roll this die, and then just they don't know what am I going for? Am I shooting high? Am I shooting low? Just enough to have that. The rest of the rules you don't need to know that much. Not that they can't be provided for you for the people that want to know how the sausage is made, but uh, it isn't going to be as beneficial to you as it may be if you're one of those types that like to play and exploit rules because at the end of the day, it's still some human being that's arbitrating things irregardless of the guidelines of the rules. But that's just kind of the basics of it. The term that most people are using to refer to this is what they call free Kriegspiel, but and I find it different than Rule Zero, as I said before. But as far as the paracosmic convergence, I have that as a full role playing game suite where
Cool.
you've got the role playing game, you've got the mass battles, you've got your own or its own set of campaign uh, worlds, several actually, the ability to generate dungeons with tables, the ability to generate uh, wild outdoors with tables. In fact, you can generate whole continents with the tables that are uh, provided. It has a basic character creation system. There's no hit points per se, like there is in D&D or something like that. There's wounds. Everything's narrative. You don't lose 4 hit points or 20 hit points or whatever it is and count backwards until you reach 0 or -5. You might lose a finger. You might lose an eye. You might lose an ear. You might get kicked in the huevos. You might get run through, your skull
Well,
crashed by a
that'll never
giant
happen to
warrior.
me.
Right, whatever. Get poked in the whatever, but it's oh
Okay, let's
yeah,
finish that sentence.
but it's got that kind of specifics, narrative specifics, so that now a lot of people don't like that. They say, well, now I can lose a character. He doesn't even have to die for him to become useless. Well, I don't normally watch TV, but I've been taking care of my elderly parents, and they do a lot. And I saw a dude on a variety show dance the Humpty dance, and he had one leg. And that mother was doing things I couldn't do with two. So just because you take a wound doesn't necessarily mean that the guy is. I mean, sometimes there's certain things you just can't do anymore, granted. But I'm just saying, it's amazing what can be overcome with a determined human. So just because your character takes a major wound doesn't necessarily mean that he or she has to be out of the game. But
Long John Silver was still a pirate even with his peg leg.
it can happen. But the point
Yeah. Well,
is
he
that
wasn't real, but still, it can happen.
the cycle of being reduced to virtually zero, being healed by some potion, and then coming back again. I understand people are fantasy is fantasy and all that, but that started to get a little long in the tooth for me. And so
Don't take away my healing powers now. I would be upset.
right, that's so I just kind of like the idea of being a little bit of everything being a little bit more lethal. So that's what I took out of the thing. So by the way, I put the
You're okay. I get it. I know you deep down. You always wanted to kill us off.
well that's another thing.
I'm kidding. I'm
No, I
kidding.
know, but no, it's you should address that because I was playing with a guy who just felt that the best way to provide a challenging adventure was to be as adversarial, not in everything, but when the combat showed up, he wanted you dead. He didn't want you to make it through that combat, and he was disappointed if you beat his people, if he rolled badly. He felt that the best way to uh,
Oh, is this someone that was DMing a game for you?
yes, yes, yes.
Oh, okay. I got you.
It was kind of a military thing. You want a lot of people complain about this. Um, that you don't want one of these guys who's or gals who are out to just ruin your day. You want somebody that's going to provide interesting narrative and maybe a challenging battle, but isn't really your enemy. Whereas I think of a lot of times when I play war games or something like that, you're the op four. If you're running a war game, and because we can do collaborative, you don't have if you play a war game with a friend, you and the friend can be on the same team. You can use the service, or the service is what they call the op four, the opposing forces. They play the bad guys or the enemy. And from that perspective, you want to stomp these folks into the ground because you want it to be realistic and challenging. Some people say DM shouldn't be that way. If you get a service from us with a DM, you have the assurance that you don't have somebody who's looking to beat you out of ego or has any bias towards you or anybody else, any system biases. They're a professional paid person. They don't have any reason to fart around with well, I really believe it should go this way, or I really think that this system is geared this direction, and none of those opinions you'll have to deal with. The only thing you'll be doing is you'll be dealing with somebody who's truly objective and truly neutral in the situation. Just thought I'd bring that
You
up.
know what I would think though, if it were a game where you were playing I think the type of game would make a difference on that. So if I were playing a war game, I would expect that it would be more of an op four situation versus, if I was just playing an adventure type game
Sure, it
where,
changes things.
yeah, because I mean, what would be the point of like if you're going to play the enemy and you're going to have to, I mean, a war game, they are going to try and kill you. There's no
Yeah,
question about it.
right.
That's kind of the point.
You're not doing if you're
So,
yeah, right. And then people say, well, how can you be an arbitrator of the rules if you're a participant in the battle? And that's why, like, there was a game, a really neat game, love to play it. In fact, I'll run it for anybody who wants to, because I only got to do this a couple of times in the service. There's one called NATO Division Commander, and it was set up with the idea of having a judge. But because of this concern, what it was it was set up where a way where you kind of played judge at first, and then you played enemy later. It's kind of difficult but again, the if you hire a service, now you hire somebody who is their interest is in providing the experience, not proving a point, not having an ego, not winning the game necessarily unless that's part of the experience. And if it's a war game, that is part of the experience, is to have a fair but challenging thing. It doesn't matter to them whether they win or lose. So there I believe that if you try it and you'll see that it's easy for somebody who's working as a judge, and I emphasize working, uh, to be both challenging and objective. because they're, I'm not fighting for some trophy. I'm not playing the game in front of a bunch of peers and I want to look like I want my ego stroked for winning. I've got no reason to. And in fact, it would be against my interests to do anything that would be bias, because now you got
Right.
people, run, wanting refunds, and so we have legitimate neutral people. But yes, when it comes to just flat out wargaming, those legitimate neutral people are going to
And
try to crush you under their boots, metaphorically speaking, as far as the game goes, because that's the point. That's the idea. That's the challenge.
right.
That's the role to play from, and they're playing a role. So yeah, all
Makes
depends.
sense.
Hmm.
Well,
But
lots of interesting things. I think probably we should end here for you know, for tonight, because my body is telling me it is time to go. But I have enjoyed this conversation quite a bit, and uh, and
well,
thanks for joining us. Well, I don't
yep,
know, or Vance. I guess I should call you Vance, but thank you for joining us.
yeah,
Um,
we'll
a
wrap
lot
it
of
up.
fun.
Got a couple
Yep.
of concluding statements and things to talk about real quick before we end this thing. That conversation was good. It was lengthy. I hope it was coherent. We do tend just to we I like this format of just chatting, though sometimes I understand that chatting can be a meandering way of discussing. So if you've listened and or participated and you felt like it wasn't structured enough, please let us know. We're, this is new, and the feedback, constructive criticism and feedback would be very helpful. And it's a hard thing to get on the internet, I've determined, at least for me. So I would really appreciate it. But I think it's good. I think it works well, and I think we covered basically everything we wanted to. I did mention to people when I told them that the program was occurring that we were going to discuss a couple of things that were coming up in the future. So I just want to do that real briefly. A couple of things that are coming up in the future is we're going to have a couple of player interactive segments that are going to come up. We have one that's a
Oh,
is yeah. There's a mini role playing game where we have the audience participate, and there'll be a
awesome.
little different mission every night, and it's meant to be more uh, help you see how you can meld war games and role playing games together, and still have something that is enjoyable, whether you're primarily a role player or primarily a war gamer. So just little scenarios, a little something for everybody to get involved with. We've got a couple of other contests coming up. Think about your tactical acumen, if you have any, or strategic. If uh, strategy versus tactics is kind of a wargaming phraseology, but we're going to be presenting you with scenarios we'd like you to look at. They range from fantasy combat D&D style to modern combat military style type of things, and everywhere in between, where you'll be shown a tactical problem. We'll ask you for how you would handle this problem, and we'll review some of the top answers as they're chosen by viewership. And after the vote is in, we'll discuss who scored the highest. Um, we also want to just stop talking about the games that we make and start playing them, both for you to see them and understand them better, but also for you to try out on your own to see if it's something you want to get involved with. So there'll be some more gameplay on the show coming up, starting with Magenta. But again, we'd love to have you as the audience member get involved. So let us know if you're interested in a demo of any of the games that we have, and there's many of them. Armageddon's Edge is one that we are working on that's ready to be demoed, and that is a modern military game post World War II. Hello, somebody
Oh,
else has got
sorry.
something to say.
Yeah, it's a baby. She likes to come in at the end of the show sometimes and say hello. And
So We can hear that pretty clearly. She's quite loud, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Hi, Kitty. So yeah, it's a post World War II war game, and we're featuring that as being in a platform to do the large geopolitical exercises that we were talking about earlier in the show. We also have ancient warfare and fantasy and historical, a kind of homage to chainmail. That's a system that you can use in conjunction with paracosmic conversion or on its own. It's a kind of mass battle supplement, if you will. And we'll be playing. Which version did we choose to play? Magenta.
The Bella Magica Antiqua
Right.
Magic Battle.
We chose Latin for a reason, and we don't speak Latin, so
I
but we
don't know
chose.
anyone who really does, but
Yeah. But anyway, it just roughly means fantasy battles, and so those are two. We have, like I said, the role playing version, and we have a couple of events that people can play that we have been playing. You heard us speak ad nauseum about Star Wars because we are playing Star Wars West End games, D6 system from the 80s. The campaign is uh, hopefully going to be a testament to
um,
what we're discussing now, in that it
we're
goes
going to
on.
play that on Saturday, right? That's
That's Saturday
Saturday
at
at
10 p.m. Central Time.
10
Yeah,
p.m. Central. Yes. Okay.
right, right. And there are
Yes.
there's a corresponding game. This is another example of war gaming and role playing game. There's a corresponding game about the warfare in Star Wars. A Star Wars Kriegspiel game that you can play. It's play by post. You can play that at any time you want. There's a small orders form that you fill out to direct your forces. You can be in control of rebellion, neutral, or imperial forces, either ground and or in space. Uh, and whatever happens in that play by post war game is translated into Ash Worlds. So it's actually playing on top of one another. I call it on top. It's an overlay in that if you have your Star Destroyer or whatever, just an example, at a planet that the role playing game is at, then the two have meshed. So it's just a way to connect the two games. So we
Cool.
also are trying to get people involved in BattleTech. We have BattleTech on the tabletop in two forms. You can play on one planet in battles fighting over that particular planet using the BattleTech tabletop system made by FASA, because I'm an old school war gamer. I don't play new stuff. That's okay if you don't have FASA. I do. We can work with you. The other one is another long term or perhaps maybe open ended system like we've been talking about that involves playing the fourth succession war forward, where you pick a section of forces from one of the great houses and fight other players who have commands from other great houses, starting at the fourth succession war and moving forward. So come to our Discord channel. I'll put the link in there, and you can sign up to participate in any of these great events. There is no charge. We're just trying to facilitate a little bit of gaming for people online and have a little bit of camaraderie and community here at Command Post Gaming. I'll put the link here for you. That's your, feel free to join up, talk with the other players, socialize, and let us know what games you're interested in playing, and we can hook you up with them. So there's my long pitch. They won't be like that all the time, but I just had a lot of announcements to make. So again, next week we'll we'll be playing a game mostly, so be prepared. And if you want to participate along with Magenta in playing that game, please let us know prior to game time, well prior. We'd like to hear from you at least by Friday so I can prepare for having more players involved. And I really encourage you to do that. You don't have to learn rules, you just have to show up and be ready to play. So until next
Mhm.
time.
Yes. Look forward to it. Thank you so much, everyone who listened and conversed with us. Much appreciated. And I hope everyone has a good evening. And Vance, we'll see you on Saturday. Looking forward to it.
Right. And there's more coming. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You'll be real excited to see some of the things we have coming up down the line. So stay tuned. Check us out whenever you can. Every Monday at 7 p.m. You're in for some great surprises. And as we, kind of polish this thing up and keep bringing you news, commentary, and everything else gaming. So until next time, we are signing off. Thanks
All
again for
right.
joining us. Have a good
Have a
night.
great night, everyone.